So a former Labour MP, presumably now reduced to wandering the House of Lords like a ghost with a diversity lanyard, has popped up to declare that multiculturalism isn't failing. Yeah, right, and I suppose Diane Abbott is a maths genius ready for Countdown, Gary Lineker a working class hero, and Rachel Thieves, she's writing her own speeches. The bloke made national news, not for his stirring defence of British values after being ejected from Parliament, but for hiding from a crowd of angry pro-Palestine activists in Leicester, like a frightened tortoise retreating from its ethically sourced fair trade shell. And then he promptly lost that seat, not to a Conservative or a Reform candidate or a Green, but to an independent who probably thinks the Hamas Charter is a manifesto of hope and peace. But don't worry, folks, multiculturalism's going absolutely fine. Tell that to the good people of Sheffield, my friends, where 200 Eritreans, not content with just booking a function room and some disco lights like we all do, marked Eritrean Independence Day with a full-blown street brawl. Metal rods, bricks, blood on the tarmac, a charming little cultural exchange that had absolutely nothing to do with this country, but still managed to turn parts of Yorkshire into downtown Mogadishu for the day. Now, this isn't multiculturalism, it's multi-conflictism. We're importing everyone else's squabbles, hatreds, and ancient tribal beefs and acting surprised when it ends in utter carnage. Now, the police, God bless them, probably too busy rearresting a pensioner for misgendering somebody, are still trying to find 22 of these fine, upstanding gents. 18 of them have already been charged. But will any of them be deported? Of course not. That would be racist, wouldn't it? Can't hurt anyone's feelings. Better would just let them hang around until they're ready to whack each other again in round 2. Coming soon, later this year. The truth is, our elites are so petrified of being called mean names on X that they're creating a culture where law-breaking foreigners are handled with kid gloves. And ordinary Brits who dare say that this is getting completely out of bloody hand are treated like they've just goose-stepped down Whitehall wearing one of Prince Harry's dress-up costumes. Foreign flags, they fly totally freely in our cities. But you try walking down your high street waving a Union Jack these days without being accused of, I don't know, triggering someone's intergenerational trauma. And schools are binning Easter celebrations in case someone, somewhere, might be offended by a cross or a chocolate egg. In London, you've got Labour MPs forming black-only political caucuses, because apparently nothing screams racial equality quite like reintroducing racial segregation in the name of so-called progress. Ofsted, once a bastion of standards in schools, is now headed by a former head teacher who thought it wise to get kids chanting from the Quran and wearing hijabs on the school run. And the Lake District, you know, that idyllic bit of England that inspired the likes of Wordsworth. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. Well, it's the place now getting a super mosque, because obviously that's exactly what rural Cumbria has been crying out for. Forget your broadband speeds and stuff like that. What you really need is a super mosque. We've become a country too frightened to actually assert itself and its values. We won't fly our own flag. We won't deport criminals. We won't say no to incompatible customs. And we won't even defend our own traditions in our own sodden schools, all in the name of an experiment that's visibly, audibly, and often violently failing across the piece. Multiculturalism, it isn't about integration. It's about segregation. It's not a melting pot. It's a war zone with PR. And the only people still pretending otherwise are the ones who can afford to live nowhere near it or would quite like to win their seats back. If you import people en masse from places where political violence and religious sectarianism have become national sports, and then you don't insist that they leave behind that pretty significant baggage at the border, what do you think happens? Don't have to be Einstein. You end up with Sheffield turning into a scene from Black Hawk Down, Birmingham Council bankrupt from having to pay for 300 different sodden translation services, and a parliament that resembles the United Nations without the so-called decorum. But the political class, they don't care. They live in leafy enclaves, they send their kids to schools where no one gets stabbed over whose flag gets flown, and then they lecture the rest of us on tolerance while they triple lock their front doors. So no, multiculturalism isn't working. Not unless you think working means religious radicalism, political violence, failing schools, rise in crime, and a public too terrified to actually speak and utter the truth. It's not racist to point out that Britain is being unmade. It's just plain bloody obvious. And unless we start putting British identity and British values first, not second, not third, not somewhere between Eritrean brick fights and Dawn Butler's Black Caucus, then we won't have a country left to argue about. I'm Darren Grimes, and for more, you can join my Substack community, www.darrengrimes.com.